In this module, we are now going to talk about positional mobility. This is an area of mobility that I don't often see talked about. Most mobility, as we've been going through it, you're done in this neutral body position, the standing position. And that's fine, that's a great place to start, and it's a great place that you can get a lot done. But what we find is by changing your position, that changes your mobility. This can happen in a couple different ways, and what you'll see throughout this module is taking these ideas of mobility and doing them in a bunch of different positions. We have the laying position, squatting position, headstand position, arms overhead, hanging, bridging, push-up or plank, and then other, because obviously those 7 don't cover all the possible positions you're in. But I just want to do enough of these here to give you an example. Now, why do we focus on this positional mobility? Because when you are in one position, that changes how you are able to move. It changes the joint position. So if your arms are overhead, that changes how you're able to move the scapula. It's a different body position than the standard default position down here. If you're in a squat position, your ability to move your knees and your hips is going to change. Even your back is going to change. So one of the things that this does is that in some cases, it changes the loading on the joints. Actually, in many cases, it adds a load onto them. And in some, like the hanging, you're actually unloading the joints. So it's loading them in the opposite direction. And this is very important for mobility because by manipulating that loading on the joints, it changes how the movement feels and thus what it's going to do for your body. So the reason we work with a variety of different positions is that each position is better or worse for certain mobility. Now, as we look at all these, and you'll see this in the coming videos, you can generally work on all the basic mobility. So we can go joint to joint across them all. In some cases, there really isn't much difference from the normal standing position and in these. So if we're laying down on the ground, laying on our backs, doing wrist circles, not really going to be much different. But if we're laying on the ground, on our backs, moving the spine around because you have the ground right there providing some resistance or making it harder in different ways, that is going to change the movement. So as we go through with these, once again, you can cover the basic joint mobility patterns, and some of these will be loaded, some will still be unloaded, and in addition, each of these has some specific mobility exercises that really make it useful for using that position. So for the hanging, right, because this is unloading, this is great to do the scapular, the shoulder movements, and you can hit them in a way that you can't possibly just standing or any of the other positions. So you can do the whole body hanging, but if you only do one thing, then doing this area is going to be best. In the headstand, we can really load the neck in that manner, which can be useful if you're going for that. So you're going to see this as we go through the different videos. It's important to build that foundation with just the standing, keep things simple and whatnot. And of course, then we are going to move into these more difficult ways of doing the mobility. And what you're going to see is that this changes up how it is and thus makes it more difficult. It's a way of complexifying the movements that we're working on. And this is important because as we get into intuitive mobility, you can be intuitive about it, but if you just do that in a standing position, you're only accessing so much. So much of what we're doing with the positions is allowing us to get new access points, new ways of moving that aren't in the standard way of doing things. So although we cover these 7 positions here, really there's unlimited possibilities. Every way you move one joint changes the interaction on the other joint, sometimes subtly and sometimes more grossly. So you'll see this come together more. Some of these will be used throughout the intuitive mobility, but first we want to focus on really just building a base, working in these each individual positions.